Hey, look.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, there's her.
Well, here we go. Yeah, there's her voice, everybody. After some technical difficulties that you in the passive listening audience will never know of, Michael and I and our guest, who we will describe in just a little bit, will be are happy to be here with you on the Regeneration podcast. Hit it, Michael. What's going on, brother?
Well, two things are going on. One thing that's going on is nobody guessed last week's Name That Tune, which I actually didn't sing, but I gave the lyrics. Maybe Adam can tell. Welcome back, my friends.
Yeah, I don't know.
It never ends.
I do now because I looked it up. Can I say it? But I had gotten.
You look like Kilroy, Mike. I mean, get in.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you. I had gotten the song in my head and I could sing the lyrics, but I had to look up the band Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
That's right.
And yeah.
Smart Evil 9, man.
Yep.
Taking us back a little prog rock. But the other thing, so I want to do a Name That Tune for this week, because it's this week in the history of American politics. Let's see if you guys can. I know you can. I know you know the riff, right? One of the angriest riffs ever. Can you name it?
Angry. I can't name it. No. Adam.
I can't name it either.
You got
I'm very bad at this.
One more time for our
Oh, here it is, like Ohio, right?
That's it.
Right.
Ohio. By Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, with Neil Young.
I can get into each one, but I can't just like flesh it out. All right.
But now the reason being, right? Because 53 years ago,
it all went down.
I think it's next Thursday was when the Kent State shootings would happen.
Oh, yeah.
And
okay.
I've been teaching I've been teaching young people for over 30 years, and I teach in college for 20. And so often I would show that video. There's a really great video I cannot watch without weeping, to students, and you see like the high school graduation pictures of the kids they shot, right? And I would tell students that, this hasn't happened, I don't think, since, but don't think it can't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And, especially it's even ramped up over the last few years, I would say, that like the mask is off. Right?
Thomas Hobbes worried about worms in the Leviathan, and it seems like there's fewer and fewer worms to worry about, Yeah. Thomas Hobbes, rest in peace, my friend, because the sun seems to be going down, which is a sad, angry segue, but to something we'll be talking about today. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael, you're going to say something?
Oh, I would just have to say, reading Adam's essays has got me thinking about it even more. I was thinking about this. I don't know how old you were in 1970, Mike, but I imagine you were 4 or 5.
I was 2.
You were 2, and it was the day after my 8th birthday. And I remember watching that on television and just, talk about, so I watched that within a couple of years. I watched the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the assassination of Martin Luther King, and this. I mean, my God, I think my whole generation must have grown up with some form of PTSD from watching this stuff on TV.
Right. And another PTSD, like if you were, some people would claim it was there if you saw the towers fall down. A theme that's come up countless times on our podcast is a form of PTSD from the notorious 3 years of COVID, which is going to relate not tangentially but directly to our guest. Mm-hmm. Adam Smith, I'm gonna read, to get the conversation going. Then, in your first kind of intro, I want you to describe your background. You teach at the University of Dubuque, Iowa, political philosophy. I found your writings through Front Porch. They appeared, and again, I was telling him before we came on air. As soon as he appeared, he wrote with such calm mastery on current events that I thought he had been writing there for a long time or something. You entered a world and you already had more knowledge than I did. And I feel like I've been in that world a long time. And there's an important part of our pre-conversation, which Michael doesn't know, that's fascinating to me. But I'm going to, just almost as an incipit, which is the word for those Ivan Illich readers, if they read the In the Vineyard of the Text, those first lines that constitute a papal encyclical that almost are like a musical register. And this is a famous quote from Alistair MacIntyre that our guest Adam Smith uses in a writing called Medicine After Virtue. A crucial turning point, says MacIntyre, in that earlier history occurred when men and women of goodwill turned aside from the task of shoring up the Roman Imperium and ceased to identify the continuation of civility and moral community with the maintenance of that imperium. But they set themselves to achieve instead, often not recognizing fully what they were doing, was the construction of local forms of community within which civility and the intellectual and moral life can be sustained through the new dark ages which are already upon us. Now, Adam, again, it is a famous quote. It describes something that I don't want to claim to myself as a veteran or anything, but that I've been kind of thinking about for a long time and kind of contributing. But Michael, I think you'll find this interesting. I said Adam came on the scenes. He's going to tell us that he was a very different person before COVID, and he would say he became radicalized. Michael, in a minute, I'd like you to describe yourself, but I'm going to say I didn't necessarily see it coming, but it was all of part of a tapestry, I guess I had seen. Tell us, Adam Smith, about your background and about this radicalization.
Yes, radicalization. It's a good word for these days. Everybody's being radicalized in one direction or the other, I suppose. It's probably good to start with my background, actually, because this might be a little self-serving, but I was saying to you, Mike, before that it's not so much that COVID happened and I just changed my mind about everything. It felt more like I had kind of brushed off some layers that had accreted over the years and remembered some earlier convictions that had never really, I'd never quite applied them to political circumstances in the way that COVID really forced me to. So, my background, I grew up on a small farm in Indiana. I went to a fundamentalist Baptist church. I went to an evangelical college, Olivet Nazarene in Illinois. I did my master's degree at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto. And so I have a pretty deep background, or I guess a trajectory that led me into a pretty deep background in, I guess, an intellectual, academic kind of Christian faith. And after my master's degree, I got married and we just traveled around and had lots of fun adventures for 6 or 7 years before I went back for my PhD, which was from Brandeis. And that took another, 6 years. And I guess over the course of that time between finishing my time at the Institute for Christian Studies and finishing my PhD at Brandeis, an extremely, left-wing school, kind of just, I guess, became, what you might call a standard variety liberal person in terms of politics. I always had reservations about, the campus hijinks that Brandeis is kind of famous for, and the woke stuff, and so on and so forth. But it was tough in the Trump years. You picked a side, and you felt like, well, the other side is. So I didn't really resist that way of thinking too much. So I guess when COVID came along, it touched on some of the most basic kind of almost beyond dispute sort of convictions about limits beyond which we should not go to ensure security and safety, for example. And it also just kind of showed me this incredible latent tendency for conformity and groupthink and aggression at anybody who didn't want to necessarily go along right away with it. And I'll also say, personal circumstances. COVID is very much about medicine, medical control. And my wife has multiple sclerosis, so we have lots and lots of experience with, the hospital system. And this probably also seeded us with some suspicions of the way mainstream institutions work. So it wasn't totally out of the blue, and I can kind of explain it to myself, but it was very unexpected. I mean, for both of us, my wife and I, we look back and think, man, we were just very different people in terms of what we thought about what was happening in the world 3 years ago, or whenever this started.
Mhm.
So I mean, I'd say my background is actually really relevant to the radicalization that you're talking about. And I was saying to you earlier, I know lots of people who had a similar trajectory and surprised themselves with the way that they reacted to the pandemic. And it's funny when you look around and you can't really identify a good pattern with in terms of who reacted in what I would call the right way and who went along with the thinking. People from all kind of different political backgrounds, and it makes me wonder, like, what is it in their core constitution that kind of led them that way? But I still don't have a very good answer for that.
You said you have
Yeah,
a certain
that's a short answer.
understanding of self that led to your own radicalization. Say a little bit about
Well,
that.
I mean, I don't know if I said self. I guess like I don't know. I guess here's an example. I remember when I was younger, not too much younger, I guess. I was still kind of an adult, but my family took a trip to Disney World, and I remember like, oh, you had to give your fingerprint when you go to Disney World, and the rest of my family was like, oh yeah, who cares? And I almost didn't want to go in because like, this is ridiculous, you know. So little moments like that, right? That I've always kind of reacted to any kind of surveillance. I mean, I could think of other examples. I traveled abroad, and having to go through metal detectors everywhere to stop the terrorists or something, and I just thought, this is not a way to live. No way.
Great. This is great. Michael, before we ask Adam some of his insights, his background as it applies, we're good friends. I wouldn't know how you would describe yours. And I'll say just a smidge more about mine, is that I think I prepared myself to saturate in Illich and Lasch, particularly Illich, so it's no surprise Agamben and so forth were kind of right there early. But this guy who's been on the podcast 3 or 4 times, a friend at that time, Guido Preparata, and I were talking, and he was writing me saying, Mike, he was with the Vatican over for the Ebola crisis. And he said, I know how this game is played. And he already said, I talked to a friend in the provincial governments high up of Canada who said, at least in Canada, this is going towards a vaccine travel passports, right away. So again, he could have been wrong.
Wow.
But early on, I felt I got confirmation from somebody, not like in the know, but it was the phrase, I saw this game with the Vatican Ebola. And I thought, what the hell does that mean necessarily, right? But that whole thing settled in me, and then so that's a little bit of mine. Michael, what was yours?
Well, I'm kind
you were prepared from birth.
I'm kind of by personality.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I'm suspicious of that. And like Adam mentioned, groupthink. I mean, the herd mentality. I mean, the biggest shock of my life was entering academia and realizing that free thinking was not allowed here. Because and you saw this, and Adam's written about this a little bit. At the beginning of the pandemic, one of the first intellectuals of a world-class level to come out against it was the person I would most expect to do it, Giorgio Agamben, right? Yeah. And he wrote his. I mean, he's a really wonderful thinker, and in his book, The State of Exception, right, or Sucker Home. It's what he's talking about, exactly what was going down. And he said so.
Yep.
And all these intellectuals turned on him, like venomous turning on him. Even people I knew in graduate school, or even before and after, who were big Agamben people, they felt betrayed that he stayed consistent. It was nuts. But I'm not the kind of person, I'm always, it's a horrible thing being Irish Catholic, is that you're always looking for a fight, and you always don't agree with whatever anybody's telling you when it's a whole group speaking to you. When they're telling you at the beginning of the pandemic, don't touch your face. I'm like, what? Who doesn't touch their face? How are you going to not touch your face? Right? And I knew it was baloney when they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and then all of a sudden it's 3 weeks. Okay, 4 months. Okay, we'll just stay home.
I remember seeing hula hoops in parks where you could sit, right?
And I was shut down by friends, enemies, left and right.
Mhm.
And I was,
Mhm.
turns out I was
Yeah.
right. Right.
Yeah, fascinating. So,
Yeah.
so Adam,
Now I'm
if you
getting
could
mad.
give people, yeah, and something you're good at, Adam, because we've mentioned Christopher Lasch. Now, I just want you to give. I'm going to lead off by telling you to give us a primer on maybe like the critique of the medical industry today. Almost like people weren't prepared. But before that, another gift you have, because we had mentioned Lasch. Lasch will quite often review works of social science or specific papers and
Mhm.
say, the evidence the scholar presents belies his conclusion, and then says like what they actually
Mhm.
point to. And that was one of my favorite moments reading Christopher Lasch. And I think you have a mind that's able to do that too. So for example, people can go to Front Porch Republic where, well, let me do a better example is I'm going to have you talk a little bit later on the Rosa book, but you read a whole book and then you just wonder how this guy came to those conclusions based on the way he
Mhm.
laid out the world. And then even in this review of a book of papers on pandemics, you could say so many points about the papers, individual papers, yet generally the book itself took the whole thing for real, right? So
Mhm.
begin.
Mhm.
I just want to compliment you on that and to turn people to your works, which we'll discuss at the end. But if you could give people, like using Illich and really your own work and your background, what's going on? Like, what's the story of medicine and how it got so big and how it got so much control?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so going back a little bit to how my background maybe prepared me, even in a surprising way, to deal with the pandemic in a way that many other people didn't. I mean, I forgot to mention that my PhD dissertation was on medicalization. So I did not anticipate that my argument would apply to a current event like this, but it certainly turned out to in a lot of ways. So I mean, I can kind of start with that maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't intend to write about that when I went to my program. I started off interested in religion and politics, and the
Okay.
main kind of question that really interested me was, I mean, this is kind of technical political philosophy stuff, but like, what kinds of arguments can we legitimately make in the public square for and against, our preferred policies or outcomes? Like, can we make religious arguments when we're arguing for or against different laws, or is that, an attempt to impose values that nobody else shares, and so on and so forth? It's a big debate. So what's the status of religious claims in public, basically? How does the argument work out? So that's what was always kind of interesting to me. But I did a couple of small projects on different aspects of medicine, and I realized the same kind of question really shows up when you're thinking about medicine, and specifically like the kinds of arguments you can and can't make when you're trying to show that something is or is not what you would call a medical problem. Like, how does that actually work logically? How do you show
Mm-hmm.
that something's a medical problem? And medicalization is just the name for the process that brings more and more stuff under the purview of medicine by defining it as a medical problem.
You do
So
something so hysterical, which I want to mention, is in one of your papers, you can tell people which one. He takes the search engine and says medicalization of, and you did it with every letter of the alphabet. And you come
yeah,
up with this wild list of things that have been medicalized or at least addressed as medicalized, and it's worth its weight in
yeah.
gold. And the fact that like that's what real scholars should do is to get, okay, so go back to what you were saying. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fun thing. I would like to do it again and see what new things come up. That was
Yeah,
several
yeah.
years ago that I did that. But I mean, it gives you a little snapshot and just gives you a sense of that's not a list of necessarily things that people want to be medicalized, but they're either complaining about it or recommending it or talking about it
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. So I mean, just anything is up for medicalization. And so how do you do that is the question. How do you make the argument this is a medical problem? And so my account is, you ask, why has medicine gotten so big? Why has it taken up so much of our lives? I think that it's this process of definition that's a big part of it, not the whole thing, but I think that we have this idea that if you're going to figure out what is or is not a medical problem, well, on the one hand, it's really easy. You just got some facts, so some facts about the body, how the body works, biological facts. And then you use those facts to show what's a medical problem or not. And that just doesn't work logically. There's all kinds of interesting examples. For example, there's a syndrome, kind of like a lesion in the brain or something. And the effect of having this lesion is very rare, but the effect of having this weird thing in your brain it's called Gourmand syndrome.
Okay.
You have a kind of a superhuman sense of taste, and you're very discriminating when it comes to food. You can tell the difference between good wines and all this kind of stuff. That is a fact about your brain, and technically it's like the body malfunctioning. But nobody's going to say that's like a problem. That's actually kind of cool, right? That you have that.
Yeah, right.
So there's all kinds of situations where just because you can describe the fact doesn't show you that it's a problem, right? So you can't define a medical problem based on facts, and our society is totally in love with facts, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, sometimes people say, well, it's a medical problem if it feels bad, like I feel in pain or I'm uncomfortable, and whatever I decide is, a medical problem is basically a medical problem. So we'd rely on feelings. This doesn't work either for obvious reasons. So in a nutshell, I think the cultural aspect that helps explain the expansion of medicine has to do with our inability to talk about anything other than in terms of facts or feelings. We have to be able, if we're going to call something a problem at all, we have to be able to appeal to something like objective values. Like, this is not just bad because it feels bad. This is not just bad because it's a malfunction in the body. No, it's like bad because it's bad for you as a human being, whether you like it or not. Then we're in the realm of ethics. Mm-hmm. And that is not a realm that we allow, because for the same reasons that we don't like religion and politics, we don't want people imposing our values on one another. So this, shows up constantly in all of the most interesting cases of medicalization, contests over medicalization. I mean, the recent stuff over the trans issue is a perfect example. We have these facts about the body. Puberty, for example, is something that happens to the body. And the obvious, next stage of the argument, which you've already seen, made by some people, is that because I don't like this fact about the body, and because the fact is that using drugs, medicine can change this fact about the body, therefore we can define it as a medical problem, and we can, arrest puberty so that we can, choose our gender or whatever it might be. So I think that kind of, I call it a rush from judgment. We don't want to make judgments about what's objectively good and bad for human beings. And this is really helpful for the expansion of medicine, because it allows you to define anything and everything as a medical problem, and therefore under the jurisdiction of medical institutions.
Michael, there's a mower outside my window, so I'm going to hold off talking for a second. I'm hitting.
Well, I mean, I think it's important, I think, to mention that it's not just a medicalization. I mean, that's part of it, and how impersonal the practice. You use the word practice of medicine. How impersonal it has become. I remember a few years ago, my mother, who recently died from dementia at 7 years. So I took her to the doctor because she had to have a brain scan, and the physician never looked at her or talked to her.
Uh-huh.
She talked to me, and he said, "Well, my mom's right here, right?" And it struck me as, wow, this is such an impersonal way to go about things. And the woman basically didn't even look at me; she looked at her computer.
Yeah.
Whereas, I also have experiences. I think I mentioned this on the show before, where when my third child was born, he's 28 now. When he was born, he was born at home with a midwife, but his umbilical cord only had 2 vessels, and usually they have 3. And so the midwife, you should talk to the doctor. And I called our family physician, Dr. Kalsa, who unfortunately is no longer practicing medicine. And he said, you know what? I'll stop by on my way home from work. He came over. He was practicing medicine. He did a house call. That's not the only one he did. He did a couple of them for me. And he came in, he checked it out,
Yeah.
you know, made us feel at ease. He said, I don't know what to say about this. Baby seems okay. Just, gave me this other doctor to talk to. And they were actually, and this is 28 years ago. They were actually practicing medicine. It was
Yeah.
health
Right.
care, right? But where
Yeah.
where it's been I've seen over the in intervening almost 30 years that that practice of medicine is becoming a rarity, and it's
Yeah.
it's kind of the industrial model that we're looking at, and when people talk about the coming of robot surgeons, robot doctors, I mean it's like it's the logical conclusion to that trajectory, right?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that kind of more philosophical or discursive aspect of medicalization connects with that institutionalization that you're talking about. I mean, when it was a practice, it wasn't just about, facts and feelings. It was about like engaging with another human being, and you cared about what was good and bad for them, and so on and so on. Facts and feelings lend themselves to this institutionalization because that's what institutions can deal with 100%. I mean, I've seen so much of the same thing. I don't remember whether I was telling this to Mike before you got on or whether I said this kind of in my introduction, but my wife has multiple sclerosis. And so we've had all kinds of, interactions with the medical system, and some are good, some are bad, but on the whole, it's exactly as you describe. In order to practice, what we call compassion, we have to depersonalize everything because, only the facts are going to help us address people's feelings, and you can't meet the person who's actually there. So
we think like in my family, I remember being radicalized. I was reading Ivan Illich, especially his confrere Barbara Duden, who wrote a lot about the body and so forth. And my wife was pregnant with our first child, and we went to the obstetrician, and he was, I think we had the scans, but he wanted amniocentesis. And I said, I'm just not so sure I see the reason. And the doctor just said, they could die, and then I just walked out. I don't think I've ever been, we were kind of newlyweds. My daughter was a honeymoon baby, and I don't think I've ever been this directive with my wife, but I looked at her and said, we're walking out. Yep. And then when we got in the car, my wife remembered that the previous, maybe a couple months before in our church in downtown Rochester, the priest had mentioned a midwife there, and then we figured we would call the priest, find her name. And that put me on, a lot of outside practices early. But subsequently, it was the episode with that same daughter my wife was pregnant with Gardasil, right? The pressure got amped up. And then I recently had, I don't think I'd been to the doctor. I'm not saying people shouldn't go. I'm a pretty healthy guy. I don't think I'd been in 6 or 7 years. And then I had a inguinal hernia. And so I figured, I'm going to try and get in and get out. And this was my experience last fall. So I made an appointment with the doctor. They saw I definitely had one. I kind of got to the surgeon. There was all these appointments, right? You had to have a COVID test like every day before. Yep. And I was putting a lot of gas money into it. And I was still just trying to stay focused, like I was training for a marathon. And I kind of got in and got out. And then they had me meet with my local, my primary care person. And then we had a nice talk. And then this person said, can we just, it's been like so long, can we just do a physical? And I thought, yeah. Now my physical came out and showed I was healthy, but the number of things they recommended, and I think a colonoscopy would be fine. That was one. Now I probably won't do it because it just made me so mad about like everything else. So it was a tunnel that opened up into 15 highways that were just going to grab me in, to this thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's like the criminal justice system, right? Once you're in, you can't get out, even if you serve your time.
It seems to have really, the genie has left the bottle, during COVID. Yeah. It's something about it. Like most people will experience it now, Adam, with dentistry, that the desire to push products and to, define needs and impute needs, as opposed to ever going in for a tooth cleaning now. It's like you have 50 salespeople telling you, everything from, using the fancy language of, your molar has, it's just crazy.
But they say drill, fill, and bill, right?
That used to be it. Go ahead, Adam.
I mean, it's the consumer aspect of it is, of course, part of the whole thing, right? Part of the driving. From one perspective, you can kind of blame the experts for driving medicalization. Well, that's just one side of the coin. The assumption also drives it, or the
Sure.
effort to get people, the advertising drives it as well. So there's this collusion between people who think they are totally above that kind of money grubbing stuff because, you know, they're professionals and they're only in it to help people and they went to school and so on and so forth. But there's a collusion between that and all the corporations who, I mean, as we saw in COVID, clearly have an interest in, it's just completely obvious that there is a financial interest in medicalizing things. That's just undisputable. So,
which is why, you know, part of that is I was so angry. Anger is the theme of this show. I was so angry at the beginning of the pandemic, being a professor, right? Because I felt those kids were traumatized. I've never seen it in all my years of teaching. It was like talking to shell-shocked people. But around that time, I said, you know, F it. And so I introduced them in a couple of my classes, at least. Ivan Illich's essay on medical nemesis. Which was not only published, I think it was in 68 it was published, or 1971, 71. And then after he died, and it was published in a medical journal, I think it was the British Medical Journal. And then when he died, they republished it, and they devoted the whole issue to Ivan Illich, you know, and his thoughts about medicine. And I asked the students, I said, you know, so he died, I think, is 2003 or something, 2001. And I say to the students, do you think this would happen today? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. Because he was critiquing, just like as he did in education, is critiquing this this tendency in medicine to, as we've seen, to not be interested in health, but be interested in return customers, right? Right.
Yeah.
So you surrender
that's right.
That's your own sovereignty to take care of yourself to the professional, right?
Yeah. Yep. That's really interesting that you did that. You know, teaching was horrible during the pandemic. That was also, of course, part of the thing that radicalized me, just experiencing that. And especially, you know, thinking about the kids who half their experience of college was just ruined, right, by that. Or the worse, you know, we were thinking about the little kids who might not experience anything differently at this point, like didn't know how long it was going to last and everything. Just a whole chunk of your life and all your assumptions are being created. But during the pandemic, and I was fortunate enough to teach at a college that was just about as countercultural and lenient as you could possibly get. So, you know, we still met in person, and you're supposed to wear a mask or a face shield. So, that was here at the University of Dubuque. So I was still here.
Cool.
So, you know, you had to wear a mask and everything, but you had the face shield option. So I always wore the face shield option with it all the way up. So it's just, you know, kind of a statement.
or the beard, the beard mask thing.
How I had to wear it.
Yeah. But I can't remember when it was exactly, but I had a small group of pretty advanced students, and I offered a special seminar, and I called it like our secret dissident seminar. We read all of Medical Nemesis, the whole book.
Wow,
we read
the fact that you exist is so cool.
And it was great. I mean, I had a philosophy student in there, but also one of my students, he was just minoring in it, philosophy, but he's going to medical school, right? And he is planning to become a doctor. And so we got to read a lot of stuff that was really critical of his profession and made a big impact on him. I know enough of an impact that he actually hasn't gone to medical school yet. So maybe that's bad. But so, you know, it was bad. It was also an opportunity to really help people see things and think through some deep assumptions that they might not have been able to think through otherwise.
And you said you see a lot of people kind of getting radicalized. I don't know if we addressed that when you talked about yours. I think it was before. And are they following up? You know, are they following up with that, or just kind of, did they develop a smell, or are they kind of doing their reading and things?
I mean, the people that I know, it's been had a very lasting impact on them.
Yeah.
And they, continue reading in a certain direction. I mentioned earlier, like my friend who teaches politics at one of the other local colleges here had a similar kind of experience, and did the 180. But we still talk a lot about things, and I pushed a lot of stuff that I had already read on him, and now he's reading King's North. He's reading a lot of Christopher Lash, and
Yeah.
so that's my experience. Yeah.
But
Let me ask you then. Let's take a few minutes. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, Adam, I just want, because what I haven't seen is much of that 180 turn amongst the professoriate. I mean,
Oh no, I have not
besides
seen
you,
that.
most of the people I know in the college I'm working at, nobody. They're still all in, right?
Yeah.
Still getting the boosters and
Yeah.
everything, right? And still
Yeah.
occasionally wearing masks.
Yeah. The one guy I mentioned, I mean, he's totally the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
It's very much the same for most people in my case. So yeah, that is another huge lesson of the pandemic, which is I was grading a paper. I was telling Michael, this was a really nice break from grading papers, doing this podcast. And I was just grading one, and what was it? It was a senior seminar paper about Alaskan politics, because the guy's from Alaska, and he was talking about some moves to gut public education, and the criticism is, well, this benefits conservatives because less educated people are less critical and they're more conformist, and so on and so forth. And I just thought, that is just false, totally false. I mean, I've never met anybody who is so conformist as an intellectual.
Yeah.
Right.
There's
It's
this
a hard
book, I
one.
haven't read it. Oh yeah, there's this book, I've not read it. I just know the title, and the title captures it perfectly. It's called The Treason of the Intellectuals. You ever heard of that?
Who's the
I think it's a
author?
French book from the.
Okay.
I can't remember. It's from the Nazi period or something like that. It's talking about all the intellectuals who went over, and it's just because when you're an intellectual or an academic or whatever, your fundamental kind of concern is that people don't think you're stupid, right? And if you can paint a certain point of view or an opinion as equivalent to being stupid, then you can just herd all the intellectuals wherever you want them to go, because above all, I do not want to seem like those stupid people.
And that is precisely that's by design. I mean, one of the books I taught this semester and this whole year is Edward Bernays' book on propaganda. But he wrote it because he thinks it's a good thing, right? And that's exactly what he says there, is that the target audience is not, the working class, it's the managerial class. So you target those guys, and this goes back to my doctorate is in early modern English literature, religious literature. This goes back to the English Reformation. I mean, how can you turn the most Catholic country, basically, in Europe, from Catholic, where the king was even named the defender of the faith,
right,
to Protestant in not even a decade? It was by focus, and this is what Henry did, right? He took the monasteries away from the church and gave them to his nobles, and the propaganda was all centered on the nobles, right? Because they had the power, and they were the middle managers of that society. And then when the Counter Reformation came in, that was precisely the demographic that the Catholic Church was looking at. So when they sent Jesuit priests in hiding, they were not going to minister to the peasants; they were ministering to nobles in hiding, right? This is the formula. And I remember when I was doing my doctorate, I remember thinking, this is the template for propaganda. This is it right here.
It is.
And we see it to the day. And that's the class of people. For instance, I live in Jackson County, the home of the Republican Party.
Also a space center.
So we live 20 miles from Jackson and 30 miles from Ann Arbor. And to this day, if I go to Ann Arbor, which is about one of the more high-powered intellectual centers in the world. You go to there's a Whole Foods in Ann Arbor. You go there, well, almost everybody's wearing a mask still.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's so funny.
I tell my
Yeah.
wife every time when I go there, I said, it's like I visit a different planet. Where are these people coming?
Let me ask you, Adam.
Yeah.
If we took, say, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. That's fine.
Okay, I thought, like, because you're so good at explaining this stuff, that if it's almost like, let's take 10 minutes and do a little bit of primer and some of the basic maybe concepts that help people maybe understand it, why we might all be simpatico. But I'm going to ask you, and I know you'll be able to handle these. We might have a lot of listeners who might not be familiar with the term iatrogenesis. Describe that.
Well, iatrogenesis, it's doctor-caused harm, I think is how you translate that, or harm caused by the people who are trying to prevent the harm. And so, I mean, you're probably referring specifically to Illich, who's made that a big, central
and also
concept.
It's always the third leading cause of death in the country, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Still
So,
is,
I mean,
yeah.
one way to explain that is, you can kind of see it play out at different levels, and that's the basic level. Literally doctors killing you by trying to save you. I mean, as you mentioned, that depending on the year, it's always kind of floating around, but that's around the third leading cause of death is medical errors in hospitals. So, I mean, that's an obvious, simple case of iatrogenesis. But
I should add,
Illich kind of,
I just want to add before you go. I mean, when I checked when the pandemic started, the numbers of people dying from hospital or physician caused problems was higher than the death from COVID.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, COVID, I think, yeah. I mean, during COVID, iatrogenesis was on steroids, most definitely from all different kind of angles. But I mean, I would say that's a pretty good word to sum up exactly what the response to the pandemic was an iatrogenic response. But there's that kind of like actual physical, like the doctor gives you a medicine and it has an interaction with some other medicine or something, and then you die. That's iatrogenesis. But I think the more interesting level to think about the concept on is when you kind of move up and you think about social and cultural iatrogenesis, which is what Illich was especially interested in. So there, he's more interested in patterns of thinking, kind of like a safetyist pattern of thinking, or a deference to experts, or the kind of constant attempt to define more and more things as medical problems, because then you can sell the drugs that cure the problems. That kind of thing. The effect of that is, he says, to render us less capable of self-healing, of managing our own bodies, because we are constantly relying on other people to do it for us. We actually develop less of the capacity to deal with suffering, or even the actual physical capacity to fight off diseases. We lose some of that because you could think about that also on a literal physical level, because we're so concerned to make sure we don't expose ourselves to any pathogens. Then as a result, when we are exposed to some pathogens, then we don't have the capacity to deal with them as other people might have been. So, yeah. So that's, I think, that's
iatrogenesis.
No, go ahead.
Now the next one, and I think people need to hear, working in the church, Illich and others would see that a lot of the things we're seeing about institutions turning against themselves or against their intended good effects, were first kind of demonstrated in the church. So the next one I'm going to ask you to talk about in terms of medicine, Adam, is imputed needs. But again, in the church, we would see years ago, all of a sudden, according to Illich, under Alcuin, Charlemagne's library, you get a merge of the priesthood and the pastor role. And then that's the beginning of the time where the priesthood starts imputing needs, right? Like there's all these popular devotions and people could just pray Stations of the Cross, but somehow it was better. Or somehow like, I need, you're imputing people that you need more of their services. So describe imputed needs as they might pertain to the field of medicine.
Well, I mean, what we were talking about before, right? The consumerism where you're constantly selling people things. That, you know, we live in a culture that sells you things all the time, so that's not exactly unique. But there's a difference when it comes to the things that professionals sell you, because what the professionals sell has to be defined as something that you need, not just something that you want. That's the raison d'etre of a professional, is to like professionally distribute needs. But obviously that kind of ironically generates its own need for the professionals to sustain themselves and to expand their purview by constantly finding these other things that people need. So you know, it's especially easy to do that. I think this is a key point. It's especially easy to impute needs when it comes to medicine. I mean, like you said, right? You went to your obstetrician and you're like, why do I need this? And he said, because you might die or something, right?
The baby might die.
The baby might die.
Right.
Like, what is more of a need than to stay alive, right? It's a kind of a blackmail thing.
It is blackmail.
Yeah,
It's blackmail.
And that's
yeah.
what
I mean, there's a lot of blackmail.
well, that's what a lot of the doctors encouraging teenagers to get trans surgery and procedures. That's exactly what they tell their parents, right? Do you want a live son or a dead daughter, right?
Yeah,
I mean, talk about
exactly.
blackmail, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's heavy.
Yeah.
I heard an ad yesterday on not an ad, but it was a discussion on some news station, but it was about the doubling in requests for leg extension surgery. And what it is men who are short, they go through the surgery, costs about 170,000 to 200,000 bones. The recovery time is really, really long. And I don't know the actual numbers, right? So this could be sensationalist. It could be from 2 to 4, but they doubled.
Yeah.
But the mere possibility of that, you know, is an imputed need. Let me ask you another one. You know, we're going to think of the scholar Ulrich Becht. I think I've read 3/4 of the work. I need to read the whole thing again. The role of risk, the idea of risk immunity.
Yeah. Beck is, I mean, I read The Risk Society, and he is a thinker that I really want to return to and dig more deeply into, because when I read that book, it was one of those, it was written in the 80s, I think. When I read that book, it's just one of those books you read and you think, wow, he captured the whole thing. And it's like reading Illich, you know, it just becomes more and more prophetic as
or
time
Lash.
goes on.
Right. Yeah. Every chapter.
Yeah,
in that
or
book
Lash. But Beck, you know, here's kind of the way I, the maybe one of the main points in the book, at least as I take it. So, you know, we have the Industrial Revolution, and you got all the factories, and the factories are making stuff, and, you know, it has all these kind of, you know, bad side effects, pollution and workplace injuries and general satanic mills and so on and so forth. But what's being produced by the factories is the goods that, you know, we need or want. It gives us the stuff, it makes the food that we eat and so on. So you have a system that is distributing goods, and that's how profits are made, and that's how control is maintained, by controlling the distribution of goods. So Beck is trying to grapple with the great change that comes when all those side effects pile up, and the bads, the risks of producing those goods start to become visible to people. But this actually produces some really interesting effects, because there's like key differences between the goods and the bads. So the goods, you know, like you go to the store, you buy something that's made by a factory, you got it in your hand, like a concrete thing, and it's yours. You can enjoy it, you can use it, whatever. Like it's very obvious that, and you can dispute what's good and bad of human beings, but it's like an obvious thing. Whereas the bads are, take environmental pollution, for example. It's like over there somewhere, right? And I don't really know about it, except that an expert tells me about it. And so the experts suddenly become empowered in a way that they weren't at the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, because you got to have an expert not to point out the bads. I mean, if you live next to a toxic sewage dump, then yeah, I guess the bad is pretty concrete in your mind. But otherwise, you live in an era where you're constantly being told by experts that the risk of doing X is that Y bad thing will happen. Mm-hmm. And the power flows to these experts and these professionals who know how to kind of quantify the risk.
These experts.
Yeah. But the other aspect of it is this really scrambles politics too, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're used to thinking, especially when it comes to environmental, and I would also say medical issues, we're used to thinking in like, well, the right wants to get the government regulation out and the left wants to, add more regulation and so on and so forth. And the right cares about the corporate profits and the left cares about the people and so on. But the thing about risk is that it is profitable. It is very profitable to sell people precautions against risk. And so this becomes a new model, a new business model. Wow. It's a new market. So the bads are getting distributed. And so now there's a new market for technologies that promise to redistribute the bads away from you. Here, I'll sell you this mask so that you don't get COVID. And so, Beck, he really puts his finger on a kind of an emerging political economy that doesn't quite fit the old Marxist analysis, and also just the categories of left and right don't really seem to work in this new world of risk either. And we really got to pay attention to, one, how it empowers experts in a way that they weren't empowered before, because risk is just a number. It's not a thing in the world, right? You can't see it, it's just a number. And it also generates these new business models. And so the people who are used to thinking of the government or the experts as the people who are protecting us from the risks, they got to rethink things, because actually risk is really profitable, so profitable that possibly even it might incentivize people to manufacture some risks that didn't actually exist.
Now you're showing your dry sense of humor, Adam. It's always latent. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I think all of this that you're describing, Adam, is predicated on a fucked up metaphysics, because, and this goes back now, a lot of what I've written about in all of my work, but especially in my graduate work, was the impact of the scientific revolution on medicine and religious thinking, because so many of the people I wrote about in my dissertation were not only poets but also alchemists or physicians. Henry Vaughan, the metaphysical poet, was a physician, a Paracelsian physician, and part of what their project was, like Henry Vaughan and his brother Thomas, was they were rejecting Cartesian metaphysics that said that there was only the physical that we could attend to. And then later you come to people like David Bohm, when his discussions of quantum physics and so forth, and he said, the problem right now is that we have all these experts who think they're not part of nature, and so they come up with some approach to fixing a problem, and then you need to find something else to fix the problem that was caused by this problem. So, and I think it kind of goes down to that root, where the metaphysically and epistemologically, the way our culture looks at this stuff is, this is what happens. And I think then eventually you got no place to go but capitalism, right? And so then that becomes, and I've been reading Eugene McCarraher's the Enchantments of Mammon, and I think he's right on the money. Because this replaces this replaces the Christian metaphysics or the divine understanding of the world, right? The sociological understanding of the world. And as Rupert Sheldrake, I don't know if you've ever seen his band TED Talk. If he makes a great point there, talking about power flows, right? Where the power flows, but it's all where the money flows, right? And the money flows to the medical industry, right? It doesn't go to people researching exotic butterflies in the Amazon. It doesn't go to scholars of metaphysical poetry, right? It doesn't go there. It goes to medicine and technology. That's where the money is, right?
Yeah.
Which is why colleges, universities are seeing their humanities departments become invisible. if not disappear altogether.
Yeah,
Right?
that's right.
How about
Yep.
this,
I'm
Adam?
not familiar with that TED talk, but
Oh,
Yeah, I'll have to look for
before
it.
we go on, I got a question.
Yeah,
Now, I
please.
just watched it this week, and I'm sure this is the kind of film that Adam would like. Are you familiar with the film, The Book of Vision?
I'm
no, but
not.
I think it was you. I think I was mentioning to Mike, I don't really use Twitter, but I still have an account basically from COVID. I think you were talking about it on Twitter. Is
Yeah,
that
well,
right?
I was because somebody had been recommending it to me, but I couldn't find it available streaming or anyplace. And it was produced by
Uh-huh.
one of the producers was a man named Robin Minotti, who's Italian, lives in England, and I couldn't figure out why this movie's not around. And the premise of the movie, it takes place in the 17th century, and the main character is a physician who still wants to hear about his patient's dreams and aspirations and feelings, and uses that in
Yeah.
in his not only his diagnosis but his way to approach facilitate their healing. And it's really a beautifully filmed movie. I mean, the visuals are extraordinary, and it was produced by Terrence Malick, for instance.
Hmm.
Uh, and I couldn't figure
Yeah.
out. And maybe I still don't know. If you can find it, look at it. And I finally did get a copy. Somebody sent me a link that I was able to
So
see.
this Robin Minotti worked with Terrence Malick. Pretty
No,
wild.
he did. But here's the other thing.
Okay.
And this is what no, Robin Minotti, if you go to his Twitter page, he's ripping on the medicalization industry
He is.
constantly.
That's
And
how I know the
and I
name.
knew I had heard his name. He was the guy who did that, I think, an hour-long interview with Eric Clapton after Eric Clapton
Okay,
was
yeah.
injured by the vaccine.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And as we saw that happen with Clapton, was blacklisted by the power structure, and I think I'm sure Robin Minotti was blacklisted as well because they came out against that, right? And I'm wondering if that's why this movie hasn't found any distribution, not even in DVD form, right?
I'm definitely going to look for it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I will too. That
Yeah.
sounds really good. I mean, I think that is, like I can offer some philosophical or political analysis. We can talk, we can make arguments. I think that is really what we need. We need art and stories that present, that kind of challenge the narrative and present an alternative narrative. That's where things, turn. People aren't mostly interested in the kind of arguments that I like to make. They watch movies and they read books.
It makes me think too that, like, I was talking to a student about AI, and in fact, the abbot of the monastery, and I think there's a connection here, and I don't mean to go too far afield, but like with AI, okay, we need to monitor it, but it's also incumbent on us. And I'm going to reduce this to kind of a left brain, right brain thing. But if AI kind of mimics the left brain, but excellently does so, as well as regulating it, and necessarily more important, and this would, I'd think of Owen Barfield, but we need to, we need to have an evolution of consciousness. We need to kind of work on these things becoming more human, that even a trained, that a good mind, you could have one level of consciousness that really can't tell the difference between AI and something else. But I really believe, and tell me if you disagree, because I know you understand the basic idea I'm getting at. But the other response is, like, we have societal mental regression, where AI, is looking a lot like human thought. But the problem is human thought is looking more and more mechanical. And that kind of goes to what you were suggesting, right? Adam, any thoughts on that? That it seems to drive this idea of developing the truly human will lead to more community. It'll lead to more, human flourishing. It'll lead to more engagement with nature. If we set ourselves the task of becoming more than these kind of left brain automatons, as opposed to using our left brain to outwit people on arguments, and just make sure AI or the technocracy doesn't grow.
Yeah. It's kind of a tricky question. I mean, I think for better or for worse, maybe for better, maybe that's just how it is. I don't know, but most people, the effect of AI on most people in society will be, as you said, most people's minds will come more and more to resemble AI. They won't use it; they'll just be absorbed into that kind of structure. Not literally maybe, but the result will be that they won't be able to tell the difference between what a human is doing and what an AI is doing. But I think that there will be other people for whom it is an opportunity to like kind of reclaim and rediscover and you know you sharpen yourself like against this kind of reduction of the human. You sharpen yourself and you rediscover what it really might mean to be human. So I
That'd be
think
beautiful
I
poetry,
actually,
like your life depended on it.
yeah, I'm actually kind of optimistic because it's such a I mean, it's a little bit like COVID, right? It forces you one way or the other. And, you know, for the people who are forced one way, that's great. But it has a negative effect on everybody else. So I, in some ways, I'm kind of hopeful because AI is like, you know, like you're talking about the humanities, Michael, and of course that's totally the case. But I've read a couple of pieces that, you know, just make the argument that the importance of the humanities, it's never been as easy to demonstrate the importance of the humanities to the people who are going to care about them already, because you can contrast it to what is happening and what's accelerating. And I mean, I'll give an example. On my own campus, I'm grading papers. I find one that I think has been generated by Chat GPT, probably, you know, 1 out of 10 or something. It's already happening. It's ridiculous. And I've been working with a group of faculty and students. I had this kind of idea rattling around. I would trot it out in classes. I would just propose students a hypothetical. What if you had the opportunity to live in a tech-free dorm with some other people who signed up and decided, you know, you're going to follow certain rules for the use of technology while you live together, so on and so forth. I usually had like 5 to 10% of the classes say, yeah, I'd do that. So I decided, why not try this out? So I'm teaching a May term, starts on Tuesday, and this is the model. So we'll have a class and we'll read Illich, we'll read stuff about tech, Jocko Lewell, but they will live in a dorm where they don't have a smartphone, no video games, some other rules, and for the month, right? And I don't think that would have been attractive to students if it weren't for the, I mean, I have one student who's in the class and, you know, I asked him like, why are you doing this? And he said, he's like a sophomore. And he just looked at me and he said, we students, we don't live socially healthy lives. And I want to figure out how to do that. And that is just profoundly insightful. And he recognizes that. And it's like, they don't really know how to do it, but they know they need to figure out how to do it. And some of them are attracted to the challenge of trying. So
very, very cool. So how about, like, as we kind of draw to a close, give some minutes to, I think, something that is hopeful at the end. You know, another article you sent me was you brought in a scholar whose name I'd seen, but I didn't even know what his main insights would be, didn't know his field or anything, Harmit Rosa. But he makes a distinction. Tell us a little about him, your interest in him, and the distinction between control and resonance, because, you know, we talked about risk, we talked about all these things, but, you know, there's this anxiety epidemic and, you know, a huge desire to control, you know, and fear comes from a loss of control, right? So I was always saying during those 3 years, everybody was saying, you know, love trumps hate. And I was always pointing out that, oh gosh, okay, for a slogan, fine, but it really means I hate Trump. And the other thing is that, and the other thing is that in the Bible, not everybody has to adhere to this, but in the Bible, love is contrasted not with hate, but with fear, right? Whoa, then all of a sudden we can get somewhere trying to understand these times. And so Hermit Rosa, you know, and fear is based out of control. It's based out of control. And this kind of distinction between control and the word resonance, you know, how did you find that it has explanatory power? What led you to it? And describe it for people.
I don't know what led me to it. I think I saw somebody else talking about the book itself, so I ordered it. Very short, very readable. Undergrads could read this book. It's got a lot of I mean, that's one definite way to describe it. I mean, I don't know exactly how hopeful it is at the end. In some ways, it's hopeful in the sense that you know, the apocalypse forces people to restart or something like that. But
or he gave us a construct that could maybe work. You know, a kind of a construct with legs to start. You know.
Yeah, I mean, Rosa. So the idea of risk is a pretty good entree into his idea of control. Like, it's interesting if you think about risk. You think about somebody who is a risk taker, and they seek out risky things and they do them. That's the opposite of somebody who wants control. That's somebody who wants to interact with the uncontrollable. I showed this fantastic documentary to my students at the end of the semester. It's called The Alpinist. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's about a mountain climber. And it's just got a lot of good elements that messages that I want the students to kind of pick up on. But it's this guy, and he does, it's hard to watch the movie, the kinds of things he does, just free climbing up crazy cliff faces, ice, and thousands of feet. And, this is a guy who does not need control. Instead, he feels most alive when he is, and this will be Rosa's term, when he's resonating with a nature that is fundamentally uncontrollable by him. But it gives him a sense of, you can't call it control because that's going to be a confusion of terminology, but it gives him a sense of his own capacity, right? He can grapple with this. Mm-hmm. He doesn't need control over it. No, he's willing to take the risk so that he can feel, he's a unique guy, right? But he's like, when I'm doing this, I feel more calm and more in the zone than I feel when I'm, just sitting around with my friends or something, right? It calms his mind, because everything has to be focused on connecting with the mountain, reading the signs, figuring out how to get from one handhold to the next, and so on and so forth. It's a really great image of what Rose is talking about. But he says, like, he argues this is our essential human capacity, the capacity to resonate with what is fundamentally uncontrollable, rather than to use technology, procedures, systems to render it controllable and manageable. When we do that, it actually falls silent and we can no longer connect with it. And with ourselves, with God, when we try to manage these things, they recede from us. In that article you mentioned, I kind of compare it to like a Chinese finger trap, right? Like the harder you try, the harder you
because with sleep. Use the example of sleep.
Yeah, that's true. Like the harder you try to fall asleep, the less likely you're going to be able to fall asleep, because it's not something you control. It's something you have to let happen, right?
Right. So sleep kind of comes out to meet you, and you have to kind of let go into it. Yep.
Exactly. You fall asleep. You don't do anything. You have to let it happen. So Rosa, and this is his account of modernity. Modernity is an effort to expand our control over the world, and as a result, we lose this capacity to resonate with the world itself. But his conclusion is that we've succeeded beyond our wildest dreams in controlling things. But the counterintuitive effect is, he calls it the monstrous return of the uncontrollable. So the natural world, human nature itself maybe is uncontrollable, but that's a gift to us because we can resonate with that kind of uncontrollability. The uncontrollability of the modern world is different. We don't have that sense of capacity. It's the normal experience of, I don't know, my washing machine just broke and I tried to call and get a replacement, and I was on the phone with them every day for a month, and it didn't work in the end because you're just constantly up against. Yeah. You're constantly up against something that doesn't talk back to you,
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because when you say that, it reminds me, there's this, I don't know if you've seen this documentary, I've used it with philosophy courses. It's called Being in the World. You know this one?
I don't know.
No, I don't know.
It's a good documentary. It's basically about,
what's it called again, Mike?
Being in the World.
Okay.
And I show it to students like in intro philosophy courses because it shows you that philosophy does not necessarily have to be about reading really dull texts. that maybe philosophy is how you are behaving in the world. So it's kind of Heideggerian in a way. And but this, Heidegger's idea of worlding occurred to me as you were talking about this, because one of the points that he makes in the film is, there was no jazz out there waiting for it to be discovered. People had to bring it forth, and now the world of jazz exists, right? What we're experiencing, and I think in a surveillance state, is just the opposite of that. And I think the comparison to a kind of Gnostic enclosed universe run by archons is not a bad comparison. Um, where and I think what you're talking about, Adam, is the response to that is a kind of worlding. So this example, of the guy in the documentary on the mountain climber, that's worlding, right? That's finding your way. It's a kind of discovery of truth through, you could call it mastery or expertise, but not in a kind of professional way. But so you get to that liminal space, and I do it through music
Yeah.
and through writing poetry. Other people do it through other experiences, farming or whatever happens to be, where you enter in, you discover a new world. You open up something, and it's a great example. I don't know if you know the guitarist Michael Hedges, who's just
I do not.
he died. Oh, you gotta
No.
look him up. Look him up. Aerial
Yeah.
Boundaries by Michael Hedges, and he reinvented how to play the guitar. It's just stunning to see what he does. Unfortunately, he died about 20 some years ago, as a young man, a relatively young man. But I saw an interview with him once, and he talked about precisely this. He said, and he always uses different tunings for every song, and he's a really wonderful composer. He said, I'll change the tuning on the guitar, and a whole other world opens up. So it's an example of that, and I think
Really
that's, and this is what I find that college students have been hungering for post COVID, is experiences of authenticity, right?
Yeah.
They want to experience something real. They know they've been served a construction made of bullshit. They want to experience something real, or at least a lot of them.
Yeah.
Do. They don't know how to do it, but they know.
Yeah, and it's right, and it's not only COVID. I mean, I think that there's a lot of unreality in college per se, and not just during COVID. There's a lot of semblance of authenticity, procedures that they see through with no problem, and everybody pretends to believe it, including the professors. And then I mean, I got a colleague, and every once in a while, every couple of months or so, he's got like a running thing where he has students and faculty and just whoever he invites over to his house, his backyard with fire, cook hot dogs, drink beer and stuff. And he'll do something like everybody tells a story, or he'll have one person give a little talk about some project that they're doing. So it's got this kind of academic-y sort of thing, but it's completely informal. And the relationships that you have with the people that you're encountering ideas with are totally different than they are in the classroom, where you're just doing it for the grade and for the job. And that's exactly, that's what interferes with making it authentic, because you have this ulterior purpose and you're pretending that you're doing it for some other reason, but really, you're just there because that's what you do. You go to the pipeline, you get the job, and so on and so forth. So those alternative, that's what he's doing. He's creating a world in his backyard. He's creating a world. And the students, when they show up, I always say to them, like, this is what the intellectual life is, not the stuff we do in the classroom. Like, I try in the classroom, but this is where it's at. And it has a big impact on them.
Yes, I ask students, I said, do you guys talk about this stuff in the dorm? What do you guys do when you go on the weekends? What do you talk about this stuff? What do you do? Right.
Yeah.
What did he say?
They're afraid.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I had.
Michael would agree. Say more, but I want to say how simpatico you are and how easy it is. But say some concluding thoughts here. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a concluding thought. It was an additional thought. It was just a really striking thing. A student the other day, she's an RA, and this was a politics class, and she was, what were we talking about? I can't remember, but somehow it came up about something like conversation in the dorms and things. And she said, oh, well, we have a kind of a policy against talking about controversial issues in the dorms. Like, we're kind of supposed to,
right.
We're supposed to discourage students. I just said, are you serious? That's a policy?
That is new to me. I've never heard that.
Well, I mean, she was a little bit, I was like, it can't be a policy. That would be, she's like, well, I don't know if it's really a policy, but we kind of try to like make sure people talk about things that they are nice and they agree on.
It's almost
So,
like the phrase agree. Yeah, I think almost as if the phrase agree to disagree, just is posted and nobody talks about anything, right? They've all just.
I mean, and I just thought, what a total, I mean, my college experience was, the typical one where you stay up until 3 a.m. debating Calvinism or some stupid thing like that, right? And that's what made it the experience that it's supposed to be. And like you're actively like encouraging people not to do that, and you are going to generate this hunger for something else, and that I fear can't be generated by colleges, which is bad for me because that's where I work. So
Now, Adam, tell us where people can find your works and things. Oops. Where can people find where can people find your writings and your works?
Well, I have this languishing Substack that I started with Tara,
with our friend Tara Thiek.
Yeah, right. And neither of us have done much with it. I wrote a little piece for it. The most recent piece is when that pandemic amnesty article came out. I can't remember when that was. I don't know if you saw that. Somebody, asking for kind of a truce, like, oh, hey, we were wrong, but
my bad. Yeah.
So that's the last thing I wrote. Yeah, my bad.
And then Front Porch Republic.
So and at Front Porch Republic, definitely. I mean, I have wild ambitions and dreams of writing a lot more. Fortunately, I have 2 kids and another one on the way. So 5 years old and 2 years old. So it's doesn't leave too much extra time. But maybe I have some ideas for the Substack specifically. I started it during COVID, and most of what I wrote on there was kind of about a theme. Paul Kingsnorth, I think, and not only him, but he said something that really kind of captured the core of my view of what happened during the pandemic, which is, there's all kinds of aspects to it. There's the corporate profiteering and so on. But I think fundamentally it's a spiritual problem. There's a spiritual problem that made itself clear during the pandemic. And that's what I've been trying to think more about. And that's what I have tried to use the Substack to think about. The Substack is called The New Pandemonium. So if I ever get to adding some more to it,
we'll link to it. We can link it on the comment too.
Find it.
But also, I mean,
and then we'll definitely go ahead, Mike.
But also at FPR.
No, that spiritual problem you're talking about, I mean, it's metaphysically good and evil, right? I mean, it's not just a spiritual malady, it's psychology. It's not that. It's something much bigger. And that's what I've been seeing anyway.
Yeah. It's not. No, I totally agree. I think that's, you could use the word spiritual in this kind of a flighty way, but I'm trying to use it in like the deepest possible sense. So it goes to the core of what it means to be, a human, and choices between good and evil are being presented to us. Right. So
absolutely.
Very cool. So that's definitely one to, I think not even into the too distant future, because on that Substack, you also coined a term, whether it was the title of an article, and I'm speaking of things we'll talk about when we have you back, which I'd really like to do. You wrote at a time where, because I wasn't even working for the church then, but my wife is a pianist, I was kind of going to, I was the only a guy under 70 who didn't have young kids who was like in the doors of a church during those years. But you wrote an article, you talked about like on trying to go to church. And we're going to talk about that next time too, because you gave me some words to something I couldn't figure out, So Adam Smith, can't say enough about the insights you give. You're probably the clarity of your explanations on these things that I don't think I've said this to other commentators. Some are big names or guests we've had, but you're a voice that needs wider distribution. And if we're one of the few podcasts you've been on or anything, boy, it's our good fortune, because you say a lot of things really, really well, and you're a penetrating thinker.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. So
thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration podcast. We'll see you same place, same time next week. See ya.
Farewell.